The road to hell is paved with good intentions. What is a real-life example of this? 1. The unexpected consequences of your donations. Tom's Shoes, a company that pledged to donate a pair of shoes to a child in need for every pair purchased. Turns out that the company's donations disrupted local shoe markets in developing countries, putting local shoemakers out of business and creating a dependency on foreign donations. Additionally, the shoes donated by Tom's were not always appropriate for the local climate or culture and were not always of the same quality as the shoes being sold. Reportedly, they have ended up in landfills. When I took a trip to Kenya in the late 2000s, Tom's were a huge deal. I bought some for the trip thinking, hey, if they make these for the people there, they must work well in that climate. Wrong. Their soles are useless. The thorns and prickles and the grasses there go straight through them. Never bought another pair. 2. The introduction of non-native species as a means of solving an environmental problem. Hawaii resident here. It's been the bane of our existence. Invasive species goes all the way back to Polynesians. They brought pigs and chickens for food. They cause all sorts of problems now that they are wild. We also have mongoose. Rats were decimating the local bird population. So the government released mongoose to handle the problem. However, mongoose are diurnal and rats are nocturnal. So instead of going after the rats, they went after the birds. Cats, brought as pets, now they are an ecological menace. They love eating the local birds. See a pattern? Right parenthesis, new line. Edit. Rats eat bird eggs, not the birds themselves. It has the same impact to the population though. 3. Haiti did not have cholera. A disastrous earthquake hit Haiti in 2010. After the earthquake, humanitarian forces from the UN arrived to help, and the Nepalese contingent reintroduced cholera to Haiti. This epidemic has since infected approximately 850,000 people and killed over 10,000. 4. Most moral panics? Stranger danger, convincing people in the 1970-1990s that hundreds of thousands of American children were being yoinked into random cars by evil strangers each year, while downplaying and underfunding the resources that could actually help decrease child abduction. Child abductions not only never came anywhere near those huge numbers, but it was and still is nearly always a custodial issue or a very close family member. Teaching people to be wary of kidnapping is great, directing all their fears toward vague spooky strangers and not helping people learn how to actually prevent kidnapping is kinda shit. 5. My mom called my Christian university, that 17-year-old me attended by my parents' behest, to inform the school that I was smoking weed, drinking, and having sex. She thought because it was a Christian university, they would put me into a counseling program to get me back on track. The school told me to pack my bags, leave immediately, and they rescinded the 80% scholarship I obtained, causing me to owe the full 100% for that semester, which I'm still paying off a decade later. Edit. This comment is getting a lot of traction, so I figured I'd add another nugget. After getting kicked out of college, my 18th birthday was the next month. My parents somehow, my dad is a tech nerd so he could hack any account I had, found out that I was going to have a party at a friend's house to celebrate. There was alcohol and weed at the party. Lo and behold, my parents called the state police and alerted them of the party. I and 3 other friends got arrested that night. Most charges were dropped or expunged eventually. For those saying I got what I deserved or my mom was justified, it takes 2 to tango. My choices played a role for sure. This story was a response to the prompt about good intentions going sideways. My mom had good intentions when she alerted the school of my activity. She didn't want me to get kicked out and still be paying for it years later, but that's what happened. I don't claim sainthood in this scenario. I broke the rules knowingly. How did my mom know about the partying sex? I visited home for a weekend and she went through my bags while I was in the shower. She found condoms and a bottle of liquor. She already knew I'd been smoking weed here and there for a couple years at this point. I said my dad hacked my online accounts to discover I was throwing a party. Excuse my lack of intelligent tech vocabulary there. He had a program or software where he could track keystrokes to then discover passwords to my accounts or something along those lines. Similar to what they used to monitor the computers in my high school. How is my relationship with my parents now? It's great. I have forgiven them completely. That doesn't mean I don't feel some resentment now and again. Their choices, and mine even more so, made my life very difficult. At my lowest point, I made a plan to kill myself. All of my dreams and potential seemed crippled by debt and a lack of gainful employment opportunities. I lived in a town, technically a village, of 300 people in rural Northeast USA. Thankfully, before I was able to harm myself too badly or permanently, I had a mystical experience. During that experience, I saw my situation, my parents, myself, and reality from a perspective that was not my own regular waking consciousness. I saw that I could choose to perpetuate pain and suffering by holding on to anger, hate, and resentment for my parents and myself for the choices we made. I saw it was possible to feel joy, to forgive, to repair, to heal. My life didn't instantly become better the next day, but my perspective shifted to where I wanted to repair the damage that was done. Anger is the second wound your enemy inflicts upon you was very applicable in my situation. I could let the anger and hurt dictate what my life would look like, or I could choose to cultivate joy, come what may. Holding on to anger and resentment was another form of allowing my parents to control me. The real power move is to forgive. To release the hold your enemy, for lack of a better term, has over your life through your unhappiness. Behind true forgiveness is where we find freedom. Much love, Reddit. 6. George W. Bush admin created subsidies on corn to promote the production of ethanol to be used in fuel, etc. Better for the environment and so forth. Couple of downstream effects. Ethanol in fuel lowers the fuel efficiency, so you have to buy gas more frequently, more of an inconvenience, but that's why fuel with no ethanol is usually slightly more expensive. Corn sold for other purposes than ethanol didn't qualify for the subsidies, so there was a strong financial incentive to sell to ethanol producers instead of for food. This drove the price of food corn, and food that uses corn-derived ingredients, up, affecting poor people the most. The financial incentives were so strong that farmers were buying up cheap land in areas that were very unsuitable for corn production or switching away from crops that would grow more easily if they couldn't afford more land. In western Kansas, corn needs to be heavily irrigated in order to grow. There is an enormous aquifer that stretches from South Dakota to the Texas Panhandle. Increased irrigation combined with a years-long drought drained the aquifer to the point that the city of Hayes has to truck their water in. 7. A man named Dr. Spock wrote a handbook for child rearing. It was widely circulated and well received. Many of our parents likely got their child rearing advice from this book. In it he recognized that babies throw up a lot and therefore recommended newborns be laid on their stomachs to sleep. Unknowingly, this would result in the accidental smothering deaths of thousands of newborns. A huge number of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, cases can be laid at his feet. To this day, the Back to Sleep campaign is still fighting to update parents on what we now know. Newborns should sleep on their backs until they can reliably roll over for themselves. 8. Since the abysmal performance of American schools has been in the news recently, No Child Left Behind and its replacement Every Student Succeeds Act. America has never had really good public education, but it used to be serviceable. NCLB came in to try and create some milestones and accountability. Instead, it made the problem worse. ECSS came in and tried to address its problems, but changed the stuff that wasn't the problem and left the bad parts unscathed. Taken altogether, 57% of high school graduates can't read at a 7th grade reading level and over a quarter are functionally illiterate. Oh man. This really resonates with me. My brother taught middle school history in a very low-income area in the South. This comment could be a post of its own about what's wrong with low-income area schools, but I just want to relate one thing that always baffled me. Hardly any of the kids could read. You read that right. 12 and 13-year-old kids couldn't read and could hardly spell their names. On top of that, there were behavioral problems that went completely unchecked. These kids were just allowed to do whatever they wanted. They'd repeat the mandatory grade, and then they'd be passed along to be the next teacher's problem. My brother didn't teach any history those few years. Instead, his job was to teach them how to read and to stop them from fighting, fucking, and selling each other pot. It sounds unbelievable, I know, but the apathy that NCLB caused created this giant behavioral problem and is actively setting back these low-income communities. These kids are doomed from the start and nobody cares. The people who try to help are quickly burned out due to the complete lack of support and cronyism that forms in the school system. I love this country, but our public school systems are a fucking train wreck. Edit. A few people have added this in the replies, and I was trying to keep this comment relatively simple and neglected to add this as directly as I should have. The families were largely not in the picture. They were either in jail or didn't care. Maybe a grandparent here and there watched the kids. These kids did whatever they wanted, and when they got to school, they didn't listen to anyone. So it was in part the absence of the family, but also the school didn't do anything either. Both are the problem. 9. Once upon a time, I found a wallet on the beach. Having lost my own more than once, and not having it returned to me, I am aware that it is a stressful life event. So, my first thought was how to return it quickly. Looking through the contents, the owner was from out of state and there was no contact information other than the driver's license. Aside from that, only a few credit cards and some cash. Not knowing how long ago the owner had left, I thought, let's just sit here for a while and maybe he will return looking for it, since it is the first thing I would do. After a couple hours of fun and sun, we needed to move on. My next best idea was to turn it into the local police station, which we found easily enough just down the street. What I thought would be a quick in and out turned into a full-on interrogation session, during which I was, at one point, accused of theft robbery. It was a bizarre experience, to say the least, which wasted an hour of our day. 10. Sheltering your kid from every possible problem. The whole stranger danger thing did a number on the American psyche. Never letting your kids out of the house unsupervised for fear of the unbelievably small chance of a random stranger kidnapping them has had far-reaching negative consequences for generations. And it is far more likely that someone you know and trust will harm you rather than a stranger. My wife's parents really pushed the "you can only trust your family" bit, while ignoring that an uncle was abusing her. And that doesn't even include the emotional abuse inflicted by her mother. For years in all weather, I walk our dog around the block in front of our house. There are so many dog walkers in the neighborhood, it's crazy sometimes. At one house, the parents would be out on the porch, and their 4-5-year-old son would be playing in the driveway and would ask me questions about my little dog, who always chose the telephone pole in front of their driveway to pee on. More than once the mother came flying off the porch screaming for the kid to get back in the house. I mean, there wasn't vehicle anywhere inside that I could have used to abduct him in. It was just me, an unforgivably basic middle-aged woman in knee-length shorts, a t-shirt and flip-flops, with a little fluffy dog on a leash. A day after one of Mom's freakouts, the kid approaches my dog and Ian turns to his parents and yells, "Is this the lady you said was scary and I shouldn't talk to?" I just looked at them and laughed, but I noticed that they literally never sat out on the porch again, and the kid was never in front of their house again. WTF kind of damage does that do to a kid? 11. Bounties for killing invasive animals. You have a bunch of animals you don't want, so you pay people for each animal they kill, usually by getting them to produce the carcass or a unique body part. People then start breeding said animals. It's easier and more lucrative than catching them in the wild. The authorities find out and stop the bounty program. So the breeder let all their newly bred invasive animals into the wild. Situation is now worse than before. There's a famous example involving cobras in India, Irk. They also tried this with rabbits in the area I used to live as a kid. In this case, no breeding was required as the bounty drop-off point was the local police station. You'd go in with a bag of cute bunny tails. The officer on duty would count the tails and pay you for each tail. He'd then take the bag of tails around the back of the station and pop them in the dumpster. At which point, a friend of the bounty hunter would dive into the dumpster, retrieve the tails, go into the police station by the front door, and repeat the cycle with the just retrieved set of tails. 12. The invention of social media. When Tom was working at Friendster, I genuinely believe he wanted to build something that allowed people to socialize and communicate in a new and modern way. On paper, early MySpace is a brilliant concept that made a lot of people realize the potential of the internet. This concept was then mutilated and turned into what social media is today. Quite possibly the single most socially damaging invention that ever happened. Far away from bringing people closer together, it has turned into a tool that is tearing people further apart, making them feel more disconnected with society than ever, and instead of democratizing discussion, it has put even more power into the hands of the elite. 13. A company in a town I used to live in employed a lot of people from the local disability support center. These people had mental disabilities such as Down syndrome, and this company employed them to come in a few hours a week and work, and by work I mean little tasks that gave these employees lives a sense of meaning, purpose and structure. Things like folding pamphlets and stamping papers, and they would be paid a small amount for their time, not minimum wage but enough for them to be absolutely thrilled with their pay from working. The government made some changes so that these people had to be paid minimum wage. I assume to avoid people being taken advantage of. I am sure they had the best intentions, but this company, and many others, could not afford to pay all of these people minimum wage, and so they had to cut back to only letting 1-2 people work instead of all of the people who were benefiting from working for them initially. It was really sad, especially because these people did not understand why they were not allowed to work anymore. 14. My neighbor who is supposedly getting evicted soon. Basically, she saw young drug addicts, 30-year-olds, as people she could change for the better. She'd find them somewhere and bring them home. Evidently, the idea was that she could show them a warm apartment and good food, and they would realize the error of their ways and change for the better. That or a safe place to do their drugs. We had a door code so they could come in and knock on her door until she answered. It was a constant stream of strange people going in and out of her room all night long. I figured it wasn't my problem. People can do what they want if they aren't hurting anyone else. But then 3 of the men decided to take advantage of her because it's not like she could physically kick them out herself, and she wouldn't call the police. These are people who don't want to change. They like their lifestyle, and she gave them an upgrade. We are pretty sure they are doing meth in there. They come back at 1:30 a.m. and either snort something or smoke something that from the hallway smells like cat pee or paint thinner. Then they scream bloody murder, throw things, and have domestics until 11 a.m., like clockwork. Police can't actively go into the room, and even people on the top floor are calling them. Landlord and management is doing his best to get them out, but that's a lengthy process. They disabled the door code, but they are still getting in. Even the girl has been taken to the hospital for overdosing a few times. Threats of murder-suicide are common. Anything not nailed down in the gym and lobby are getting trashed and stolen. Lobby bathroom is trashed constantly. Cars in the parking lot are being broken into, and catalytic converters are being stolen. These men stalk around the parking lot watching people. We do the visitor rules, which are being broken. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Everyone expects to hear bullets fly anytime now. My goodwill is gone. We want her out. 15. Difficult to think of a better one than prohibition and the war on drugs. Both are well-meaning. Alcohol and drugs can and do destroy lives. But banning them causes massive problems with gangs and crime to facilitate the illegal provision of things that people ultimately want. Regulation is what's needed.